with the panel session now. So, as you can see, we have a very catchy title here: Leveraging Data Analytics for Growth Marketing, How to Get Started and How to Scale. All right, okay, so let's start with some introductions, and we'll do a little icebreaker first. So what I want to do is, I want you to first tell us who you are, a little bit about what you do, and then tell us the most unusual app that you have on your phone right now. And if that's embarrassing or not safe for work, then you can tell us one you can't do without.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining tonight. My name is Polina, and I'm leading performance marketing at 8Fit, health, nutrition, and fitness app here based in Berlin. So let me think about my apps on my phone. This is very boring, actually. There's like everything what is different types of messaging apps, streaming, Netflix, music, shopping, and obviously some face app. Peachy. Maybe Peachy is the most embarrassing one. So I like to post stories and make myself looking more beautiful. Yeah, cool. That's about me.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I live in London, but I've come over today, so thank you for coming. And I am the head of marketing at an app called Curio. It's a spoken audio app, so we partner with different publications and journalists and curate their content and then narrate it. So it's like an audiobook style, but for journalism. And I don't really have that many weird apps on my phone, but my new app that I'm really enjoying is Life Cycle. So I've been tracking all my time, and I realized that I haven't been sleeping enough. So I'm trying to change that. So, yeah, Michael.
Hello, my name is Michael. So I'm head of marketing for Taxfix, which is a tax refund app here in Germany, and we're also expanding to Italy and France this year. So in terms of the weird apps, to be honest, I'm not using that many apps at all, which is kind of embarrassing for being an app first product head of marketing. But the kind of weird thing that I can't live without is my CD player. I still go around with CD player listening music on CDs.
Okay.
There you go.
That's cool.
I think that might explain the app thing.
Should I go now?
That's fine.
I think that's actually retro, so it's cool already again.
Berlin style.
Okay. Hey everyone, I'm Sebastian. I'm the head of growth at MyPostcard, and what we do is pretty much in the name. We're a postcard company. And honestly, I think the most embarrassing app, at least judging from people I know, is that I am an iPhone user but still use Apple's map app instead of Google Maps. So I'm sorry.
That is embarrassing.
Why?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just simple that way.
Okay, well, that wasn't quite what I expected, but we're good to go, it's fine. So, Sebastian, let's kick off with you first. The reality is that the world has become more complicated. The data touch points, the customer touch points have become more complicated. Journeys are more complicated. People spend a lot of time mapping out, the personas and how the journeys work. So how do you even start as a data-driven marketer? What KPIs do you work with? How do you get buy-in from the CEO, CFO to make sure you're measuring the right things?
I mean, to be honest, especially since we started in 2014, and I think especially in the beginning, you start off with what you have, which is how many customers do you have, how many people visit the website, the app, something like that. But I think the more experienced you get and the more sophisticated you're trying to become, the more you kind of move down funnel. And you try to understand what is actually the impact that every action, every campaign might have down the line, and even not just talking about the first impact, but also retention. So what actually is KPIs? I think it's pretty individual to whatever company you're working for. So for us, we're a very seasonal company. So for us, it's especially in summer, people are traveling, or it's Christmas, so they're sending out Christmas cards. I think that's where we really have to pay attention to what's the retention in those months instead of. There's not a lot of people sending out travel cards in February. So it's pretty bleak that way. And I think that it's really, for us, it was figuring out why do the customers actually come to our app? What are they trying to achieve? And what's kind of the story that they tell themselves? In a way of, I'm that person and I like to do things the easy way, but still like to be individual. That's why I use the app. So we try to make it as easy as possible for them to do that. And you just map out those different events in the app on the website and just go for that and track those over the month. And then basically retention and first-time effects.
Okay, so it sounds like you've learned quite a lot through experience, and also you recognize some seasonality. Have you ever had a sort of situation whereby you've got the wrong KPI that you focused on and then had to course correct, and what was the impact?
I think it wasn't really the wrong KPI, I'd say. I mean, you're learning, so in the beginning, most of what you're doing is not perfect. But I think for us, it was really, we really neglected like the side effects of most of the decisions we were making in the beginning. So you might just optimize for KPI number 1, but it just drives down KPI number 2. The only problem is you never even thought of KPI number 2 until then. So I think that's really where you got to learn, you got to really step up your game throughout the month and then keep learning, keep improving. And that's how you adapt. So for us in the beginning, we were just focused too much on like top funnel. How many visitors, how many installs, how many, like stuff like that, where in the end, we don't care how many people install the app. We care how many people actually send out cards, how many people come back, tell their friends. I think that's really where we really try to focus more on our customers instead of our visitors, where we're trying our best to actually like tell them what we do. But in the end, it makes more sense for us, especially since we're kind of like bootstrapped that way. So we have to really focus on getting that across, and that's what we look for in KPIs.
That's actually pretty fun. Like every time you have the KPI or a couple of metrics that you look at, there's always side effects. And every time you kind of switch it to a next level, there's something else that's popping up. So I think that this is always the case. So it's quite an interesting one.
Yeah,
overall.
I agree. So at the moment, we're working on kind of defining what our best and worst expected metrics are, and our founders have been like, okay, but how can we achieve all of the best metrics at the same time? And I'm like, that's never happened. You can't have every single thing as the best performing all the time, but you just have to, we can work towards that and have a look at what was happening whenever these best metrics were happening, but having all of them happening at the exact same time is, yeah.
In Germany, you have a beautiful word what says eierlegende Wollmilchsau. It's like the pig which lays eggs and brings the milk and the wool. And this is so funny because every time like a CEO tells you like, yeah, we would like to grow, but be ROI positive and all of the things. We would like to, but we need to really concentrate ourselves on one particular KPI. What is the company objective? What are we going for?
And your retention should be perfect as well.
Yeah, obviously.
Cool. Thanks for that, guys. So I'm just picking up, Hannah, just picking up the thread from Sebastian if we can. I mean, you've got a background with going with a variety of brands, so you've kind of seen different sides of this, you know, the consultant, and now with Curio. So when you're looking for growth strategy, you know, setting the right KPIs, which we've started to touch on, is really important. How do you do that? How do you work out which are the right ones to focus on so you are not, you know, running up a blind alley, if you like?
Yeah, of course. So we've outlined kind of all of our funnel KPIs, and so the percentage rates of conversion and then the numbers that feed into those. And what we do is we kind of look at the best, the base, and the worst likely metrics for each of these. And then at the moment, what I'm doing is pulling out the best and the base and looking at the percentage delta between those and seeing what's the biggest opportunity there. So if one of my metrics is, you know, a 10% delta, I'm like, there's probably no point approaching that at the moment. But if it's like a 120% delta between these two things, I'm like, yes, this is a huge area that we can close really quickly. And then we'll kind of go into some kind of ideation, speed storming session, and then pull out, you know, our like maybe 50 to 100 ideas, dive into all of these in an effort versus impact matrix, and then start going, really.
Cool. Sebastian, were you going to say something?
Just wanted to agree.
Thank you.
Okay, so, but would you say it's like a scientific process, or is it more of an art than a science, really?
I mean, it's a bit of both. My CEO has said I have a bullshit detector. So I spend a lot of time with the data and with the product and talking to our users. So I have a good sense of kind of what they want and don't want. So if sometimes you just know something won't work, I mean, I'm always happy to experiment with anything. But I mean, when you have your whole list of all these ideas to work on one metric, then we'll put them into kind of effort score them on effort from 1 to 5, and then on impact from 5 to 1. So then within that, everything with a super high score will be like a low-hanging fruit because it will be low effort, high impact. And then the lower down the score, potentially, if it's a high impact but it's high effort too, then it will have like quite a low score, maybe around like a 5-pointer. And what we'll do then is start to concept test that and validate that before we kind of put it into product.
I think from my side, especially in the beginning, that's super important.
Definitely.
Like, especially if we're talking about like buy-in, getting buy-in from like C-level and something like that. I think early wins, low-hanging fruits, super opportunity. Especially if you actually already are looking not just at what's the impact, but also what's like side effects, and then how much do you actually have to put into it before it gets started. I think if you actually can combine these three and map it out before you get started, that's a really good thing to get everybody on board.
Definitely. And I think that people sometimes underestimate how much a low-hanging fruit kind of optimization can have an impact. Like, we've changed the copy on a button before and seen the difference between like a 10% conversion and a 90% conversion just from like a bit of text. And
to be honest, I think especially what you mentioned with how much do I have to put into it? Like, what's the hours of work for developers, for example, we have to put in to actually get a feature off the ground. I think sometimes if you compare it to, let's just change the main headline from like 2 words to 3 words, which if you're lucky, you can do that in like an hour.
yeah, it could be, or less, it could be crazy. So.
And that's also kind of like, if you actually do the A/B testing and then get the results that it actually didn't really work out, you putting in 40 hours, yeah, you get smarter that way.
Yeah, I mean, if you've put 10 minutes into changing a piece of copy and you have a success or no success, like, it doesn't matter if you're failing because at least you're learning fast and progressing. So.
Okay. So let's go up a level because I think most of us would experience this if we worked in any kind of hyper-growth business where, there's all that iteration and thinking about stuff, and then the CFO comes out with some top-down directions like, we're going to double this year. Based on, go fix it. How do you guys go about thinking about how you do that? What do you structure? How do you sort of organize yourself to make that happen? Mike, I'll start with you.
I have exactly this situation, though. It's just not...
we have 10x this year.
You had that look on your face.
3x atop of 10x last year. Yes. It's an interesting one, and I think it's a hard one to solve. I do have a very much of the can-do attitude and kind of a common sense approach to the whole thing. So basically, I'm looking usually at the overall market. So first of all, like, the market is the indicator. Your share in the market is the indicator. What is possible, what is not. What channels you're using, what channels are reacting to your product or service. So there's a lot of things that you can understand just by looking at those numbers, which are very top-level numbers. But overall, I think quite a lot of things are possible. It's just a matter of how much resources you have in terms of marketing, but not only marketing, also product is the one of the most important parts there, because if they don't work together, it's impossible to get any scaling going. So. Yes, to a degree, like you can make it happen. You can look at the data, and as long as it makes at least a little bit of a common sense, it's possible. But then you really need to think closer about what are your levers. And actually, well, now I'm working for Taxfix, which is the startup. But before that, I used to work for Hotels.com, which was part of Expedia. So we were drowning in data there, while here it's a very different situation. So you have significantly less data to work with now comparing to what you had in the bigger company. Does that mean that you are more handicapped? Not really, because sometimes the more data also means that you have so much things to look at that you have a tendency to drown in it. You start to look for something that doesn't exist, and you forget about actionability, you forget about the resources, you forget about everything, and just keep on looking and looking and looking. While here it's more like, yes, you don't have 100% bulletproof data, but you have enough to make the top level decision, and obviously you need to test. The more you test, the more you kind of do the clean test there, the more you can understand what is feasible and what is not. And that's where you need to be agile and be able to adjust your strategy, your tactics on the go. And this is, I think, the whole kind of startup life.
Definitely. I was talking with Polina before as well about the importance of making sure that your product is a product people want and that your funnel isn't leaking ahead of starting to acquire all these users, because it's a huge tendency for founders to be like, no, we need to pour people in, like let's start the acquisition now, and it's like, but everyone's leaving. Like, I can't do that yet. We need to make sure that this is a product that people want to use first, and that the flow is good enough.
Thank you for mentioning this, because for me it's never ever totally the game of user acquisition. It's always a game of product and user acquisition. It doesn't make sense to source in user without knowing what they actually do in your product. Why do they come back? Why do they renew? I'm from subscription business the last 5 years. So you can obviously buy new leads all the time and also calculate your lifetime value and increase the prices and make in 12 months only plans and all of those. But if the user are actually not coming back to your product and not using it, maybe they forgot about subscription, they're still paying, but this is not the user you would like to have. You really need to understand where they come from, what are they using, what are the features, how we can implement more of those, and abandon the features which nobody is using. So yeah, and also coming from a bigger company being like 700 people to now start up with 40, totally see you. Because in the end, for me, it's also like, what is the actionable insight I can act on today versus what is like data proof. I know we had a lot of conversation with our data team where like, it's not statistically relevant and significant yet. I'm like, yeah, but we need to act today. And once it's relevant and significant, we actually lost the opportunity. So for me, as a marketer, what is not from the data science background, it's more like a gut feeling. Am I secure enough to take an action and then learn from it, or should I wait longer?
I think especially with, in general, but this is my first subscription product, and I've been working here for about nearly 2 years now, but it's so important to not just focus on how many subscribers you have. Like, I've spoken to so many companies, and within this company, we've spent, at the beginning, there was a huge focus on, let's just get subscriber numbers up, but that doesn't kind of respect how people are using the product. And what we really need to do is move towards having this like kind of action-based North Star, which is, so ours is like daily listening subscribers. So that's people who are actually coming in and using the app every day, or whatever frequency cycle is your cycle, but driving people towards that experience rather than just subscribing.
Cool. So let's have a look at something a bit more practical now, right? So individual dashboards, KPIs, what you measure. So you've got two quite different stages here. You've got a Curio and MyPost are quite early, hypergrowth, and then you have obviously both Taxfix and 8fit who are AB sort of series investment. You know, you're a bit further down the line. So what are the things that you actually measure on a daily basis? What are the key things for you? And I'll start with you, Polina.
Mm-hmm. So this is obviously different team by team, also from the operational needs. I think we always need to start, what are the overall company objective? Where are we heading? Is it ROI positivity? Do we need to grow by a certain extent? Do we adding some particular amount of weekly users, paying users? So all of this, for my department, obviously, I'm really looking top level, first of all, on the blended numbers, because the proportion between the amount of revenue you produce through the user acquisition needs to have a healthy proportion to organic impact as well. So if you just 90-10, that's not healthy and not sustainable. So I'm obviously looking first of all on overall blended ROI. How do we track towards this? How many paying subscribers do we add in this particular month or amount of time I'm looking at in the moment? And also looking down basically by channel. There's some performance marketing lead, so seeing which channels are actually driving which amounts, but also which proportions. And for me, let's say portfolio approach is very important. Obviously, you can drive more efficiency if you run only one channel in one particular country. But the question is, do you need to grow sustainably in which amount also? And here the question is, can we measure? There are so many interesting questions. Can we measure basically, all these stories with YouTube, whatever else? Can we pick up 2 cities in one particular country which are similar? And then we write hardcore advertising, video advertising there. Do we see particular impact on organic? Is it behaving like we would expect to behave? And there are so many interesting questions you can look into. But from my perspective, I always check the blended ROI, check performance by channel, and also look into how many weekly active users, how many daily active users do we have. I think this is quite interesting for me to come from the bigger company to a smaller one, to be really closer to the product. This is what amazed me.
Yeah, I think this is very, very similar to my situation as well. Like while Polina was speaking, I was remembering my slides that I have for the new starters about marketing. There I have this basically this rocks balancing on each other. And this is basically the balancing act that I see in marketing as well. So it's so true that you can't really look at one specific channel. You really have to work the whole kind of marketing channel mix, because the blended numbers are the ones that really matter, and that's where you start adjusting on the fly, like more things about the channels, because there are so many different correlations between the channels that are not really necessarily seen directly in the channels, in your normal dashboards or numbers. There is basically the branded causality. There's spillovers. There's view through. There's different attributions. There's whatever else you want to look at it. But at the end of the day, you can really complicate your life and like try to put in like different attribution models and really try to dig deep into all of this. Or you can try to do it in a more simple way by managing the whole kind of channel mix as a one beast. And if you're doing this, and if all the channels are working together to achieve the certain KPIs, that's I think the main thing that's gonna happen. And yeah, I agree with you. It also depends on what you want to achieve. Like, do you want to achieve profitability? There's things that you can leverage. You want to achieve growth? There's other things that you can leverage. Is it short term? Is it long term? There's a lot of things that change based on those criteria. And I guess like I'm not going to go into all the details now, because otherwise we'll be sitting here until tomorrow. So if you want any kind of, if you have any questions afterwards, like just grab me somewhere if I'm not too drunk.
I think from my side, the first thing that we had to figure out is, what does success actually look like? Yep. Because I think in the end, especially going by, like starting out, you could probably go to Google, type in best practice, whatever you're looking for, and then you just keep going. I think in the beginning that might be an okay strategy to do, but the more you actually realize that each business is different, it sounds very cliche, but in the end it's true. So you need to figure out like, what does success look like for you, and then make your dashboards as actionable as possible. So who actually needs to know? Instead of having like one dashboard with, I don't know, 200 widgets in it, like create 20 dashboards with 10. It just makes way more sense, so that everybody's actually focused on their job. Like, if you actually do have a good team, everybody should know what success looks like for them and their team, and then they should be working with a dashboard that actually like replicates that, so that they're actually focused on, whether it's daily or weekly or monthly, what is their job, what is the numbers that they're judged by in the end, and what does success mean to them, and then you can actually keep going and keep adding to it, or keep subtracting from it, but you basically stay on course.
You can take it even further. Like, you don't even need that many dashboards. Dashboards are there to just give you the high-level indicators, either per channel or for the overall performance. But actually, you have to have two other elements. On one side, you have to empower your team to be able to dig deeper into all the numbers by themselves. So the data needs to be set up in such a way that anybody can interrogate it to the right level of actionability. On the other hand, for more complex things, you do have to have an analyst that can dig into more complicated things. So if you have this set up, like out of like all three of them are set up correctly, this is your best bet for growth.
And to just add on this, and then you can make the data actionable in the way that it's actually automatically rule-based, and the action what you don't need to think about, because it's just super simple. And for the rest, it's also all the causalities, you told it in English, what you just cannot see. Data might tell you something, but it doesn't mean that applying that would bring you to the future what you actually thought about it will be.
I think just to your point, and I want to link it to what you said earlier with the North Star metrics. I think it took us a while to actually get there, but in the end, if you don't want to go for a dashboard, make it like one KPI per month. Like, what are you actually focusing on in your team in this month? Because that's actionable and that's easy to do. And I think when you're talking about like causality, and for us it's really like, what's causal, what's just a correlation. I think that is really hard for everybody to actually figure out. And sometimes you think you got it, and then 3 months later you're like, oh shit, we actually went the wrong way. And I mean, if you go in the wrong direction, it doesn't matter how fast you're going. So in the end, that's really where, turning it back to like buying and everything, it's really important that everybody knows that's the direction we're heading, that's actually what we have to put in, and that's what we're hoping to get out. And I think that's where those important North Star metrics are really, really important.
Definitely. And whilst it's important to have the full dashboard of every metric that you've got and have that easily accessible by everyone on the team who can interrogate it, it is important to kind of focus on one. Sometimes, especially as a small team, we're 13 people at the moment in our company, and we will focus on one thing at a time and like really go kind of gung-ho on that. But what we need to do at the same time is just make sure how our actions are impacting the rest of the funnel, because as I said before, we can't always get the best performing thing all of the time, every time. So we might be able to boost up sign up to trial, but then that might have an adverse impact on trial to paid, So as long as you're able to kind of have visibility across all of these things, I think that's what the important thing is.
So I think what I'm hearing is that it can be super complicated and really complicated.
News.
Wow.
And figuring out the right things to focus on is the key. So you don't sort of waste a lot of effort go in the wrong directions, but you still have to experiment. So try things, fail fast, measure it,
Definitely.
what's happening. But sticking with that though, so I'm going to come back to you actually, Michael, because obviously you've worked also in a really, really large company like Hotels.com. So when they get to that kind of scale, does it change? Does it be, right, we know the 5 things now, or is it still the same kind of almost chaos that it can be at other times?
Good question. I think it's still chaos, but it's just a different type of chaos. As I said, I think at that point you're drowning in data, so you might have a team of like 100 analysts, and you realize that none of them are actually working on anything that has to do with marketing. And you're still stuck with doing it yourself, which is kind of weird. But yeah, no, it is a bit different, because I think you kind of understand the longer term problems better, and you have more historic data to really understand what needs to be done. But at the same time, you have way less chances of ever making that happen. Because at the same time, like all the processes are so slow that by the time you make like your 11th business case about this topic and somebody finally approves it, you get to the point that it's actually not relevant anymore and you just give up. Actually, great example. I was trying to scale Hotels.com for Russian market for about 7 years. And one of the things we identified in year 0, basically, was that at that time in Russia, the credit cards were not that popular. So the only thing that people were comfortable using was cash. Obviously, I mean, how do you make the online business with cash? Well, Russians did have the solutions for that, and that was like Kiwi kiosks type of things. They're basically, you just generated a code online, you go to this kiosk, you pay cash, and the deal is done. So we tried to implement it, and I business cased it actually not 11 times, but about 111 times. And we did implement it 7 years later, when whole Russia was well penetrated with credit cards. So basically, this surprisingly didn't work. So I wonder why. Great example.
That's fantastic. Going back to the chaos thing rather than the scale thing, when you're trying to turn an oil tanker, and it takes forever for anything to change. And I'll come to you, Polina. So you kind of been in hypergrowth here and a rocket internet and so on. And so you've got all these people doing all this stuff and you're recruiting people. How do you ensure that the different teams are aligned and the KPIs they're working with are actually driving towards that business objective?
Yeah, very good one. I think my old colleagues sitting here in the room will be nodding now. So I think the most important thing is to say, what would we like to achieve as a company, and drilling from that down. So in the end, my previous experience was working in the company 700 people, 160 people in the marketing, and metrics organization. So while for performance marketing, our goal was to add the maximum possible amount of paying subscribers to the certain cost of acquisition. For the metrics organization on the other side, it was profit and loss on the geography. Meaning, actually, they could achieve their goal without us achieving, and vice versa. And the same goes towards performance marketing in the CRM, because the CRM is a huge revenue-driving machine for the subscription business, but in order to target user, they need either installs or sign-ups. For the performance marketing team, the paying subscribers, so one step down the funnel was the key KPI to achieve. So nobody was caring about actually to bring in this amount of installs because we were not going after cheap installs. We were going after paying subscriber to the cost of acquisition. That obviously created a pain for the CIM team because they didn't have enough leads or installs to basically send push notifications and send emails to, and they could not fulfill their goal. For me personally, as a leader, it will be always just start from the overall objective and draw down which are the key KPIs for team to achieve and which are the supporting KPIs, which needs to be achieved in order for team to actually achieve the final goal. Because that created a lot of struggles and a lot of unneeded discussions in the end.
Does anyone else want to comment on that, or?
I'm okay.
It's quite interesting, that, isn't it? Because there is quite often there are quite often situations whereby one team's KPIs negatively affect the other team's KPIs, or they're just misaligned, and often for good reasons, right? but they are misaligned and doesn't necessarily give you what you want.
I think that's really something where like we've grown from like 10 people to now roughly 30, 35, and you kind of like start to notice it. So I think that's really when you start growing and you actually get what you wanted, like you get to where you want it to be. You got new problems you need to solve. I think that's where if your basis is actually kind of strong and you know where to go, and if you actually base it on data instead of like emotions or feelings, I think it helps you down the line to actually set the rules for every team and how to connect like teams within each other.
I think that's why it's important to have like a unifying North Star as well, so that everyone knows that what they're doing is impacting that, rather than just like, I got 1 million installs. Like what did those installs do? Like how did that impact like our daily listening subscribers, or how has this affected the business? You know.
And I think for us, it was really the most important decision probably to actually educate not the customer, but like everybody at the company.
Definitely.
Like people working on product need to know the change I did here, that's actually the different, like 10 different effects it had. So that they actually, on the one hand, they actually probably think about it when they do it next time. But on the other hand, just it's way more fun to actually know whatever you're contributing has these different effects, and you're way more engaged and you're way more into what you're doing. I think that's really where the difference was made for us.
I think that works at the level of the scale up and works until you get to a really big organization. Then actually data works somehow against you, even if you do have the North Star. Somehow different teams tend to interpret it differently.
Yeah, maybe. But then if we look at like Facebook, their North Star is daily active users, you know, and that's the thing that like unifies everyone together. So they might be like.
I think it's also not more data problem; it's organizational problem.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, it's about what each and every department needs to achieve, and also to be sure they actually adding value to the company. That's why they interpret also the data differently.
Mm-hmm. Like again, back to Facebook. Just as now that I'm thinking about them, they had like their problem was they were running out of people. They were running out of people who had access to internet faster than they were running out of people. So that's why they've had all of these things like about providing internet to people in countries that wouldn't have otherwise had that, because their strategy is to have the whole world on Facebook. So they have to provide the internet to get those people on there. And like that's still all in line with the daily active users thing.
Interesting. And so obviously you guys are coming from a marketing perspective. Even for us, you know, as a salesperson working in a software company, you'll have a situation whereby product want to build something that's really cool. Developers want to work so that's really, really cool. And this basics feature that, you know, gets out to everybody, you can't get done because it's basic. No one's interested in that. So it's a whole thing about making sure that the customer's the focus and what you're doing is actually going to make a difference for the customers. So let's switch it up a bit, because I think we've got quite deep into data then. And so bear in mind you guys are all really data rational, right? I'm going to ask you to give me one of the most like surprising results you found about the customers when you've delved into it. It's not like the thing you might guess that, you know, this correlation, but like, wow, I've had no idea that was going on. Start with you, Sebastian.
Please don't.
You had the look on your face that you had something to say.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I should probably work on my face then. No, it's really, for us, to be quite honest, like we were more, I don't really know if it's really learning more about the customers that we didn't really know about. It's really more for us to find out that it doesn't really work the way of we have an idea and we want you to like it and we want you to use it the way that we thought of it. At a certain point, we had to switch to, okay, what do you guys actually want to do? And actually using data to learn what is it you want to do, how can we actually make it easier? And that for us was probably the biggest switch and the biggest learning. Once we did that, like what we do is not rocket science. It's not that complicated to explain. So for us, it's really more figuring out like what's next. Like what can we add to the service? How can we actually make it better? And for that, we're actually really interested in figuring out like which other products might make sense. Like we were offering something called the weekly deal, where that for a seasoned lab like us really ramped up like monthly active users. Not that that's super important, but we found out that the more people actually engage with you, the more likely they are to open your messages, the more likely they are to actually like stay connected to you and not go to a competitor. So that was really, we didn't really thought much of it. It was one of those projects where 2 days of work, you just wanted to test it, and it actually worked out pretty great. So it's really more about our education as a company instead of the customers doing something that we didn't really expect.
Are you going or?
I have one which is actually not that surprising, exciting, but sad. In the user onboarding funnel, we ask people about how high they are, how much kilo are they weighing, what is the goal to use our fitness and nutrition app. And the sad thing we found out was the majority of a woman was having a totally healthy BMI, but they're having a goal of losing weight.
Wow.
Interesting.
Mine isn't quite like that, but we like really follow the jobs to be done framework at Curio, and so we spend a lot of time like talking to our users and really finding out what they want from a product. And you know, with an audio app that focuses on kind of journalism and podcasts, it's like what you think at first is people just want to keep their minds busy or they want to like learn things, but what they really want with, I mean, a product like mine or like yours as well, like you, Sebastian, that people just want more connections. So like on trying to like ask people why more, like what they're saying is like, I just want to have better conversations at dinner tables, or I want to be able to connect with my family on a way that I was never able to before. So we've been able to kind of position our advertising and product around that a bit more than just saying like, listen to journalism. Like it's more about like have better conversations, so.
I think really just to jump in there real quick, because I actually do wholeheartedly agree. I think in the beginning you start out, and the way I present my postcard in a way, it's a postcard app. That's kind of like what it is. But if you ask our users, it's not that. Or it's at least like number 13 on the list for them. It's connecting to grandma, it's connecting to their best friend across the world who's away for New Year's or something. So for them, it's really about connection in the end. And there's so many different ways to do that. And in the end, for us, what we had to learn is, what is it actually about? Like dig deeper, and then in the end, build something for that instead of we're building a postcard app or we're building an app, like an audio app for journalism.
Definitely. I was working on another company which was kind of partnered with Uber drivers and things like this. And what that company did was put like boxes in Uber cars so they could turn the cars into mini convenience stores, and basically the drivers would make more money. And on first glance, that looks like make more money. But what that really meant for drivers was have more time with your family, have better holidays, like, you know, appreciate life more because you have more means. And like, so when we started doing advertising based on that, it was like so much more successful than just increase your revenue by 20%. Like, so.
I think just one more thing real quick. I think for us at least, it was really, you got to really watch out for that. Like we got to a point where some people in the company made everything sound really, really nice. Like that everything has to mean something very big. In the end, a shitty feature is a shitty feature.
Yeah,
so
of course.
You really have
but
to like, watch out for that.
Yeah, you have to be emotional, but you have to be real as well. So
I agree.
So I've got quite a good non-digital example of that. And in a previous life, we were talking to the marketing director of Harley Davidson, and he's famous for saying this. And Harley Davidson is a very well-known brand of bike. Most people know what Harley Davidson is. It's not fast. It's not particularly reliable. It doesn't really do anything. If you take any of the sort of top reasons why you'd buy a motorbike, it won't come top on any of those, but it's probably one of the most desirable bikes. And he said they figured out a long time ago that their job actually wasn't selling motorbikes. They're letting 40-year-old accountants feel cool at the weekend. That's exactly what he told us.
Exactly.
And it's true. And that's their why. Anyway, so look, we're really coming to the end of our time. So I've got one more thing that I want to just talk to you about briefly, or you to talk to us about briefly, which is, so we've touched on the cross-channel marketing. We touched on how difficult it is to attribute things. You know, we as a company go in and we're talking to people about the uplift in retention you're going to get and all that kind of stuff. How do you like narrow that down and showcase to the key people who are, you know, your CFOs, etc. This is where we're attributing our uplift. This is the thing that's moved the needle for us. How do you do that? Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, it does. I think for us, when we switched to, like, in the end, like incrementality, I think for us was a key piece there. So to actually be able to have like basically 3 groups. One is always like the control group. Like we do have, at every step that we're testing, we have control groups. So one is like, some people don't get any messaging whatsoever. Some do get the ones connected to their account, but not the ones that are linked to engagement. And then per campaign and stuff like that, we do A/B testing on that level. Once we actually figured out how to do incrementality reporting and incrementality analytics on those, it was pretty easy not only to talk about ROI, but also like kind of like return on action, if you will. Like, what is sending this message actually going to do? And you can then basically go down the funnel. If I send this message or an average message of that kind, it's going to do that well when it comes to open rate, click rate, and stuff like that. And throughout going through all of that, you were able to then go to the different teams that were responsible for the different steps to actually tell them, look, that's the overall result, you did great, but that's where we actually can improve. And that's really the insights that our C-level team was looking for, in a way of that's why we spend that much money on our growth stack, in a way of being able to actually have the data, but then use it in a way that actually helps us the most.
So one quick question, when your control group, is it a genuine universal control group, a group that never ever get anything, and that's always your benchmark?
Yeah, we do have, like, at every step, we do have, of course, if we're not talking about like a 50% control group here. It's very, very tiny, especially the ones who don't get anything. But for us, it's really, we need to figure out, especially talking about how much we have to invest to actually get an effect from something. You always need to test, like, what happens if we don't do anything? Because sometimes that is the winning, the winner in the actual A/B test. Which is heartbreaking sometimes, but I mean, in the end, at least you know, and at least you can actually move forward.
Yeah, I think I'm more or less in the lucky position because our founders and decision makers are kind of pretty well versed in marketing and understand the business quite well. So basically, the selling point is quite straightforward. So as long as you have at least some sort of data to either show the trend or show the direction, or there is a common sense to trying something out, as long as you make a really clear test with control group, with everything, then I think it usually gets signed off. And as long as you show the results out of it, I think it's pretty straightforward. So you can go ahead with it. So I think I'm in the lucky position here.
I think more or less the same. Basically, I make a purpose what I need, and then it's signed off. But in the end, it's also we are running a very different approach across markets, because we have a markets where we actively do the paid user acquisition, in others not, and it's also based on many different KPIs we are looking at, and we are playing a lot with the prices, or where the paywall is coming. Do you have a 14 days free trial? Maybe we do 7 here and 14 there. So what are the correlations? And in the end, luckily, I don't have to sell anything because people are coming from the background what I do have. So I'm not talking to somebody who never ever heard the digital marketing, that doesn't understand what Google ads are. But yeah.
Anything, Hannah? Oh, we covered it all.
I mean, these guys have said everything, but I was just going to say, like, the importance of kind of testing and experimenting as well to get the buy-in. Like, if I just said this needs to happen, like, most likely that's not going to just happen. Like, I need to kind of validate that and prove it that it's going to be successful. And then as soon as that's done, then yeah, of course that's going to happen.
Cool. Good hypothesis formulating.
Thank you.
Look, guys, conscious of time and people's stomachs as well. So, look, we've covered a lot of ground there. I want to just open out for some questions. Is there any questions that want to come from the floor?
Question, first of all, thank you all. And question to the panel, so everyone can answer. So leveraging data, right? And then that's something that you've said, that having abundance of data can cause sort of like decision paralysis, right? When you have too much to look at. But also playing with data is sometimes making estimations and forecasts before making a decision, and then sometimes analyzing after you actually test. So I was wondering, how do you guys deal with this decision-making process when you can either make a forecast before and make a decision, oh, we are going for that, or you rather just do it and then test afterwards? So like how this is happening.
I think that's something that Hannah already answered, kind of like in a way of what's the impact that you're expecting, and also how much do you actually have to put into like doing the research to actually do a forecast. If you know that you're expecting like a pretty high impact and you don't actually have to do a lot to get there, I'd probably just go ahead and do it, because like the downside isn't really there. If it's something where it's really important to the company and to the goals itself, and it does take some research, of course you want to be as sure as you can to actually make it happen. But in the end, no matter how much data you actually have, it's never for certain. It's never 100%. So you need to kind of like deal with that. And you need to, again, in the whole company, there needs to be like trust, not only trust the numbers and the data, but also trust between the different teams, that everybody's looking in the same direction, actually pulling on one string. Does that answer it, actually?
Because in the end, it's about what is how this particular decision is affecting the overall company business. Because if you're talking about something like, I don't know, killing the multi-app structure and going with a single app only, which is like a loss of a huge amount of revenue, but might have also the positive sides on it. Obviously, there is a huge business calculations going into it, and you need a person who is accountable and responsible for taking this decision. And in this scale, it might be a CEO. For the other small topics, it's more about, okay, do I have a good gut feeling? Let's just test it, because it's also not crucial if it's not go right.
Just one more thing to that. I think we had an issue with that probably a year ago, where we got so caught up in all the different kinds of data and also trying to be like come up with the smartest strategy that we could go for, that in the end, once you actually get to the action part, it's kind of like lost already. So sometimes it actually is smarter to just go ahead with a hunch and go with something that you have from experience.
Yeah, like fail fast, as they call it.
I mean, you can use your data to get a hunch as well, like I was saying before. Like if you're seeing something that has like a huge delta in like your discrepancies with conversions, like that's your area to go for. Like if you're seeing something super consistent, like it's going to be the hardest thing to affect. So
I actually had one bet at hotels.com with finance guy.
it's so important to have bets.
And we went for like a forecast for a quarter. So he went with the most scientific method that he could find, so just analyzing all the data and everything. So he took about 3 weeks to make the forecast. I took about 2 hours to make the same forecast based on the knowledge of the market, knowledge of the channels, and just looking at the trends and the last year performance. So yeah, the time investment was pretty vast. At the end result was about 2% different between the two of us. So just saying.
Okay. Again, conscious time. So any more questions? We want to take a couple more if we can.
Thanks. Hi, this question is mostly for Hannah, but the rest of the panel feel free to jump in. You mentioned that you talk a lot to your customers and listen to your customers. How do you actually do that? Is it scalable, or is it based on data, or is it actually talking with people?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many different ways of doing this. Like I personally spend a lot of time reaching out to our customers, having one-on-one phone conversations with them. So, I mean, that's obviously not like a scalable thing. I don't have infinite time, but I try and have like a couple of user conversations every week, but that kind of really adds up. And I also think it's so important to kind of transcribe that whole conversation. You don't paraphrase it, but you write everything down so that you can go back to these things and look at them and pull out insights retroactively that you might not have noticed at the time because that wasn't something you were looking for. But at the same time, we also would send out surveys or send out things like this that you might have. I don't know, at a company previously, we sent out like a quarterly survey with the areas that we wanted to focus on. And then we might also pull in like people or focus groups to look at specific features and things like this. So really, if I want to look at, for example, hard active users who have listened to a certain amount of tracks, like I'll pull out that list of people manually / with a mail merge, email those people and personally from my account, and then try and organize times with them to have phone conversations. I mean, we're a worldwide app, so previously at my last 2 companies, we were able to just bring people into the office really easily, but because now we're worldwide, just phone calls are a lot easier.
I saw another question come from over there.
Thank you.
Sorry, what was it?
There's another question. This guy, there he is in the corner.
First of all, great panel. I think Sebastian, if I got your name correctly, you briefly mentioned about causation and correlation. So what I've seen again is a lot of companies usually have a lot of data, but when it comes to actionable insights, that's where the challenge is. So for example, when you look at key growth metrics around activation or retention, a lot of companies look at acquisition cohorts, and they find the problem, but it's always challenging to then map it to insights. So how do you start looking at patterns, or how do you start looking at behaviors to start deriving any actionable insights from data?
I think that's a very good question, but also a very individual question based on like what company you're actually working for. Like for us, I think the first problem that we had is like the post hoc fallacy, where just because like event B happened after event A, it means that A caused B. And I think that's where you get a lot of things wrong. So in the beginning, I don't think it's really, you can't really use the data in the beginning, at least for us. It meant, it didn't mean using the data to understand the user, but rather coming up with hypotheses based on user interviews, based on the first things that you're actually talking to your customers to, building your funnel, and then checking if your hypothesis actually held true. I think that's what it really was for us. Does that make sense? Does it answer the question? Because I think if you're talking about it in general, like causation versus correlation, I think it's super specific and super hard, because I think that's where, yeah, I think businesses can make the biggest changes. In the end, if you're able to come up with your North Star metric and you actually figure out A causes B causes C, I think that's when you actually build like an engine that you can just put more fuel into, and you're gonna get great results from that. But that's not, at least from my experience, it's not what I would go for from the get-go, because it's super frustrating and hard to actually get there, and it's kind of lucky in the beginning. So instead of betting on like the one golden lottery ticket, it's really more try to understand your users, try to build a product that both you are really passionate about, but also the user seems to like, and then you figure out like what data points actually make sense if you go through a couple of months, couple of years, to actually see what actually correlates and what causates what.
Cool. So one last question, if there's any more. There is. Yep, this lady here.
Hi. So I have a question for Michael. You mentioned that you are expanding to Italy and France, if I'm correct. So I would imagine that you had to do a lot of market research because the tax system is different in Germany and in other countries. So could you just tell us what are your biggest learnings, and also what are the 2-3 most important things that you have to look into before expanding to the new markets?
Actually, French manager is sitting right in front of you, so you can talk with her afterwards.
Great.
So it does require quite a lot of market research to begin with in all these 3 spheres, but then it also requires a lot of validation of your hypothesis through testing. Either sometimes you have to go with the qualitative research on that one, like in qualitative validation, but you also can do quite a lot of quantitative one from marketing. So for France, it's actually starting a couple of weeks, so Marina can tell you more about this after the talk.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I want to firstly start off by thanking the panel. Thank you very much. And I also want to thank you guys also for being such a good audience. You've given up your time to spend with us. So we are going to be happy to feed you in a moment. There's food at the back. And can I just ask the custom analytics people to stand up again so you can see them? So we haven't spoken to you much about MoEngage. We promised not to sell to you, so we haven't done that. But we are a marketing automation company for data-driven marketers. There's a lot of things that we do which we'll be talking about tonight. So speak to any of us when you get a chance, and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you very much for coming. Whoop, whoop.